Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had some nice tea and coffee and biscuits and cake. And we're now going to finish our afternoon session with Joyce Tang, Dr. Joyce Tang. I'm just going to say I met Joyce. I had the great fortune to meet Joyce as an examiner on her PhD thesis. That's how we got to know each other. And she did a wonderful thesis looking at late 19th century and early 20th century catalogues, as I remember, catalogues and what they could tell about piano playing trends and piano sales and things like that in the United Kingdom. And she went around playing all sorts of historical instruments in different places. It was incredible, hearing all those instruments played. And since then, Joyce has been moving on as a researcher, and she's now working as a head archivist and trustee at the Musical Museum in Brentford, which I know has been going through some problems, and I'm not sure if you might tell us where you're up to with all of that. But anyway, today, her title of her topic is Hybridae, Today's Musicians Performing with Yesterday's on Piano Rolls. So welcome, Joyce.
Can see all my slides before I actually begin. Hi everybody, thank you for the introduction, Neal, and it's so good to be here with some familiar and unfamiliar faces here in Sydney. For those of you who has or yet to come to London, the Musical Museum, the Roll Library there, you would know that I go there on a Tuesday to help out at the Roll Library, and I consider the Musical Museum's Roll Library very much like a playground to explore. There are so many rolls, and as many of you who are performance scholars know, it's like you don't know where to begin. So this year and last year, I was quite interested in accompaniment rolls, and the title of my slide derives from the concert series which I started at the Musical Museum earlier this year. The underlying principle of this concert series is to invite musicians to play at the museum, and within their program feature pieces which are being accompanied by piano rolls, playback, on the museum's reproducing pianos. And some of the program would also feature pieces by myself, so I'll talk a bit about that later. And this is really the focus of my presentation today, which is on the notion of collaborative performance between live musicians and pianists on accompaniment piano rolls. Some of you may be more familiar with the word playing with ghosts, but I personally feel it's a bit creepy to use that. Like people ask me, what are you doing recently? I'm like, playing with ghosts. So it's not something that I like to adopt, so I've resisted it for a long time. And so what are accompaniment rolls? Accompaniment rolls are rolls which only have the accompaniment parts to accompany other musicians. You may be more familiar with the concerto rolls, and tomorrow we'll hear Glenn conducting Joseph Hoffman playing the Chopin concerto. But they're lesser known in the genre, accompaniment to song leaders, duets with instrumentalists, chamber trios, and quartets. And today I'll be presenting two pieces which are two piano works. I focus on exploring the concerting and reception towards duetting with piano rolls today from the array of both historical and contemporary sources. And the reason why I'm really interested in this particular kind of music collaboration is the multifaceted agencies that are involved and their interactions. So before I talk any further, I'm going to, I want us all to enter this stage to get a glimpse of these agencies. I'm going to play Camille Saint-Saëns' Rêverie de Soi from Suite Algerès, the primo part, and the secondo part is played by Rudolf Ganz on a duet roll, and I'll be joined by Dr. Peter Phillips, who have meditized the roll to be possible for this performance. And as I play this roll, I want us to think about these questions. Who are the performers? What role and identity of the performer do piano rolls play? And how do we play with a performer who does not verbally or make eye contact to communicate to us what he or she wants. And how does this kind of collaboration inform us about chamber music making and performing, both in the late 19th century and early 20th century and today? Historical tracing. Although I focus on the piano accompaniment roles for reproducing today, it is important to acknowledge that accompaniment piano roles were already a much in-demand category for pianolas to play on pianolas. And much of this was a market demand to be used amongst domestic homes, but many of these roles surfaced to the public through the performance stage. And of course, this stage was an act of propaganda by player piano companies. This was a concert by Reginald Reynolds in promoting the Sicilian. You'll see that in this program, there are solo works and chamber repertoire. In terms of concert programming in the late 19th century, this mixture of solo and solo works was quite typical, so it's not surprising. What is surprising, though, is the lack of acknowledgement to the pianolas as being crucial performers, that they, too, input the musical interpretation. And this was observed by Rex Lawson in his survey of reviews of pianola concerts, where the pianolas are often unnamed. So in this case of collaboration with piano roles, we have the interpretation derived by pianolas, and thus still that communication with a human performer in chamber collaborations. And this tradition of accompaniment roles continued for reproducing pianos. So for example, this is the dual art, what's available on dual art. And at the Musical Museum, we have Ampico roles as well as dual art roles for the accompaniment. These were used at homes to be performed alongside another musician, but were also exhibited by the player pianos companies, of course, to public in concerts. And this staging was a sort of phenomenon already for reproducing pianos, where you kind of have a pianist who is physically absent, but their presence, which is hallmarked by their interpretation, is retained on the role. Here, they're claiming that dual art is music. They are the performer and they are the accompanist. And this phenomenon coincided with the broader debates on whether an apparatus, a machine, led by the thinking towards player pianos and phonographs, whether these non-human actors can assume the social role of a human actor. But in the case of accompaniment and concerto roles, the social role of a human actor is further complicated because there is that creative agency and that it seemingly collaborates with other live musicians in making complete the performance. They're not there to listen on their own. They're there to be played with someone else. There are many instances of these concerts involving pianists who made the roles, one of these being Myra Hayes. Myra Hayes, this is her Greek concerto role for dual art. This is not available. You will not see this in the catalog because it was never commercially circulated. The Musical Museum has a copy of this role, so it's extremely rare. So I'll call out for whoever is digitizing and making copies of these roles to be please come and scan this role. And what you see a list of the performances of this role, which I'm thankful to Rex Lawson for helping me to curate when I was writing an article about this. The start performance are those where Myra Hayes was playing with her own role. So she was there accompanying her own role. And from the review below, we can see that we captured this essence of surrealness and collaboration. A performance which was said by Sir Alexander Mackenzie at the 1926 as Hayes playing with her own ghost. But you would see that. I'm going to move on. So rather than saying that the piano role collaborates, it is more correct probably to say that the live musician does the collaborative work. For the interpretation on the role is fixed. And this collaboration can be creative. I outlined in my abstract the pianist Clara Evelyn, and we see how versatile she is in using the accompaniment role in her performance. So she was an accompanist, she was a soloist, she sang with her own piano roll, and she sang duets with somebody being accompanied by piano rolls. The Player Piano Group interviewed her in her 90s, and she remembered the performance. And this is what she was saying about one of the performance being a little bit unpredictable. So she said that the scherzo with Harold Bauer on the roll was accidentally set too fast. So she had to cope with it. So it's apparent that Evelyn had to do something to react to this and create another sense of spontaneity in the unpredictability of a seemingly fixed interpretation. So instead of saying collaboration, I thought that a better word might be to borrow what Jason Staniak and Benjamin Peckett said with reference to playing with live recordings of digital recordings. They used the word intermundane because they used it to describe the interaction between the live musicians and the dead in recorded performance, that the live musician, instead of collaborates, they intercede on behalf of their own and the dead performer in performance. And for those who are collaborating with piano rolls in the 1920s, the dead performer is the ghost of the living, actually. So the interpretation is seemingly not far removed, because, and this is the case with Myra Hayes, playing with her own replica, it seems. And even in the case of Clara Evelyn, who was playing with Harold Bauer, she would have heard Harold Bauer play, or at least have heard some of her contemporaries talked about the way that he played. But it still is not as easy as we think it is. During our rehearsal on Wednesday, Dr. Peter Phillips mentioned Rudolf Ganz, the person who recorded the Reverie de Soi, that when he was conducting the orchestra and playing the Liszt concerto, he had great difficulty in making his orchestra play with himself. So on this subject of pianists playing with their own ghost, one example that I want to use, which is a contemporary account, is the exploration of pianist Ji Liu playing of Boris Berman's composition, the Rector Scale. So the Rector Scale was written for Ji Liu to record and play with a Steinway Spiral in 2018-19. There are 11 movements, and 4 of the movements require Liu to play 4-hand duets with the piano. And then I asked Ji Liu what his experiences are, because he's performed this numerous times. And he's compared his concert in Shanghai versus his concert in Berlin. And he said even though it was the same piano, same Steinway D, he said that the piece sounded completely different because of the way that it rang out in the pedals and the sustain of the notes, which caused the changes in articulation. And so he wished that if he had more time, he would actually have re-recorded the piece again for that Steinway Spiral, because it was something that he had to adapt to with very limited time. So now on to today. What is it like to play with ghosts of the deceased? How much of the pianist's identity do we actually cling on to in the role? And what is interesting about the Evelyn's account is that she doesn't mention Harold Bauer. She doesn't mention I'm playing with Harold Bauer. She mentions I'm playing with the role, as if it has its own identity, separate from Harold Bauer. And this was kind of true for musicians that were invited to play in the Hybridae concert series. Here is the program for 2 concerts. It's actually the only 2 concerts this year. I wanted to have more, but it's difficult planning. That's a separate talk on its own. And you can see in one of the concerts in March, we had a cellist, and in June, we had a singer who came into that. After the concerts, I also spoke to the musicians to draw on their insights. And this was the questionnaire. It's a bit small, sorry. You can ask me later for it. That I asked them, and then I also followed it up with semi-informal interviews to see their responses. So I asked things like, what were your priorities? What did you find that was challenging? And it's too early to draw conclusions right now, but what was really interesting to me was to compare their attitudes in responding to similar challenges. So when asked, like, what do you feel like when you feel that the role is playing with a seemingly fixed interpretation, the cellist thought that playing with a seemingly fixed interpretation allowed her more room to explore what she could do with rubato. So she's not expecting surprises as she would get from a live musician playing. However, the singer thought that this was a limiting factor because as it didn't allow for spontaneity in the performance. Another question where I asked about what does it mean to be in sync with the role? Again, the musicians differed in opinion. Now, this question, like, do we have to play in sync with chamber music, was something that I asked around quite a lot last year. I asked Neal, I sent an email to Clive Brown. Basically, I sent a lot of emails, and then everyone's like, why you asking me that question? But you see that actually, like, they had different priorities in terms of what they think in sync means to them. The order of ranking for the cellists are timing is the most important, and phrasing then stylistically, and for the singer is slightly different. But both performers acknowledge that actually the repertoire that you play significantly influences this decision and this priority. And also, to add to that, I would say the instrumentation also influences your decision, whether you're a singer or you're a violinist or you're a pianist like myself. The way that we think of our roles in chamber music affects these priorities. So I am going to now draw to my own analysis of what I played and what I'm about to play, which is the Danse Macabre. And here I'm just going to show you the score that I annotated for the first piece that I played. I didn't make the performance of the Reverie du Soir as refined as I could, as in I didn't make myself listen to it too many times to be exactly in time with the piano roll, because I wanted to show you guys what it's actually very difficult to be exactly in time, and there's a lot of decisions that you could make in that. So for example, there is a strong interplay between the melodic lines between the two performers. Here's the score of the first 2 pages of my part, and I've annotated in red, I don't know if you can see the color, that this is the parts where it also appears on the secondo part. And so I can kind of get a gist of what they play and mimic the way that they play if I want to. But I also mark with a blue pen, so non-red one, where he uses rubato at the instances where I'm playing. And you can see that there are conflicts between the red and the blue in terms of what I can do with rubato. So I have to make a choice. Do I imitate the way that the role plays, or do I do something different? Sometimes it is really helpful to conform. So you see the septuplets in bar 6 to 7. My instinct and modern players would play these more rhythmically even. But you will hear on the recording when Rudolf Ganz played, it was a 1+3+3 configuration, I say. So it's the first is a tied note followed by 3 slow ones and then 3 fast ones. And this I found very, very interesting. So I just mimicked the way that he played. And also, if I don't mimic the way that he played, it would sound like I'm actually not dialoguing with the pianist. I'm actually playing something myself and they're doing their own stuff. So there is that consideration. Now, I'm going to play the Danse Macabre, and this is a bit different. I will have the score, hopefully, that you can follow through, and to see some of the markings I made. The biggest surprise in this role is that he makes 2 major cuts in this music. You see, he skips out entire sections, which makes you wonder, like, who would buy this role? And like, whether they ask for a refund for this role after they bought it to realize half of the music is gone. And it's kind of quite interesting chunks, as I'm not playing all the virtuosic bits in the piece. And there are many challenges, like the long gaps, and thanks to Peter here, some of these challenges are removed because he can control the MIDI stop-starts, and there can be finer precision with cueing and timing. But even when I was practicing this, I usually have my phone here, I put on one piece of headphones, and I watch the roll go by and practice along with it. Even watching the roll itself, it was very difficult to time the phrases exactly as they're meant to be. And one of the greatest challenges, which I've personally discovered in the last few days, is the acoustic rooming challenge, which is different to... Yes. Yeah. It's the acoustic of the piano in the room. So because I was practicing with my headphones, I could hear the accents much more clearly, and I could time myself much more accurately with the playing with piano rolls. But now the piano is much further away. I actually can't hear the piano half of the time. So I'm sorry if it's too loud for you guys, just a warning. Maybe you want to put on your earplugs. So I'm going to stop talking and then come back. Yeah. Yes, I have to press the start of this. Yeah, so there's a lot more analysis that I can dive you, but a summary. For a lot of us here, piano rolls are an invaluable window into the bygone performance tradition, a technology of the ingenious past. And in this presentation, we see how the piano roll can manifest into a social agent to enable musicians to interact with creativity on stage. And although the obvious performer is the role, there are so many other performing agents, invisible and visible on stage, human and non-human. Dr. Peter Phillips, for example, the piano which the piano roll plays back on, myself, all these performers pinpoint to a creative collaborating with the absent pianist on piano rolls. And I think this is an area which needs further exploration, and I welcome people to take part, especially for musicians living in or planning a trip to London. Please take part in the Hybridae concert series. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, and incredible. But it made me. Sometimes when you're doing two piano works, or even playing with a singer or a violinist, you don't necessarily look at each other. And I think all of this also depends on what your take is about chamber music, whether you need to be aligned or not aligned. And I think what the opportunity here, you have the ghost of the dead pianist, the opportunity both as accompanying the pianist, if they're playing the solo part. I suppose they're always playing the solo part, the upper part or the main part, are they?
In the first piece that I played, Rudolf Ganz was playing the secondo part.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
And Dance Macabre, Udo Waldrop was playing the primo part.
But there's so much scope, therefore, to use rubato in certain ways. If you've got the melody, you can shape it against, once you know what's going on in the other part or you've heard it a few times. I think it's really extraordinary what can be done, and you can practice different ways of doing rubato. It doesn't have to be the same twice, right? Whereas we tend to get stuck with fixed interpretations of things once we've... Yeah, I don't know what quite I'm quite saying, but I think it's just such a tool to be used for chamber music and accompaniment. So fantastic.
Yeah,
Cool, right.
To that end, when the performer of the original role performance was particularly interesting or challenging in some way, then it might present a particular opportunity.
That's right.
In fact, we did Stanford, we did the Reed concerto with Percy Granger, and that Peter's done this too. That's a very dynamic performance. The orchestra and the conductor had a lot of learning to do to be able to figure out how to be with Percy.
Yep.
And I would imagine that would be one of the opportunities for us.
Do you want to come and talk into the thing when you talk?
That would be interesting.
You did a fabulous job as well. I mean, apart from one or two places, it was very convincing. Yes.
A couple of thoughts. When I was a teenager learning, or before that, learning to play the clarinet, I had records called Music -1 records.
Yeah.
Where they have the Mozart clarinet concerto on the orchestra part, and you play the clarinet part and the music video. Same thing with chamber music. And my sister used to play the flute concertos. So it's been around in other medias as well. You can't do much to adjust those things. And they didn't really tell you who was playing, who you were playing with. It was a similar kind of thing. And there's also I've been singing songs on this website called Sheet Music Singer, where you can download MIDI files of the accompaniment, and you can adjust the MIDI files, the tempos, and various things. You listen to the song over and over, and you sing along with it, and then you can
To add to that, the Udo Wardrop art, we actually increased the speed a bit, because the original one, which I have the file, because I thought some of you might be interested, is much slower. So I'll just play you a bit of what it sounds like playing from the roll. Sorry, this is just from my phone, so. It's much slower, so we decided to take that up a speed, and it was all because Peter could do it. Yeah, so that was really thankful to Peter. Yeah.
Herman?
Yeah. Thank you for the fascinating presentation and fascinating playing. So I once saw an accompaniment role of Neal, and there were some hints for the player. For example, when the piano poses, it was a role for violin and piano. The pedal was used to give the beats, and of course, if the violin player plays together with the roll, he or she can look on the roll, and for example, for the last tone, he or she sees when the roll comes and can play together. So how do you think about these visual components when playing with the original instrument?
Yeah, so as you can see on this roll, probably very faintly, that there are pencil markings. And that's very similar to some of the rolls. Normally they would be marked up by people who are using the rolls in performance. We offered this opportunity for the musicians that were engaged to play in the Hybridae concerts. Some of them said it's helpful, but it's also very distracting in performance, because they get very nervous trying to look at the score and then look at the roll and then sing with expression at the same time. So a lot of them actually prefer to try and memorize what's happening, because it helped them to be more expressive, they say, in performance. And I think a lot of them, at first people were very fixated on trying to be exactly on time with the piano roll, and that's why this hint was very useful to mark up the score. But as they practiced more of the roll, they realized they gave themselves that liberty to not come on time with the pianist, and it was that with the roll, not the pianist, with the roll, and it was that kind of liberty that that kind of familiarity you get with the accompanist as being the piano roll instead of being the pianist, that then gave them that security to walk on stage and perform. And I think that's kind of an area where musicians are more afraid. They feel that there is no freedom. They feel that they're not comfortable with the accompanist being the piano roll. But over time, so what we normally do is we send a recording to them, and they get to practice with the roll, with the video of the roll. And when they do come and perform, they are at a much easier, I would say, condition than when they first came and walked into the museum and go, oh, I can't do this, and first tried with the piano roll. Yeah.
I'm just going to have to interject here, and I think we should continue these discussions over at the Dean's office while we're having some drinks, because our tech people have to now set up for the Hook lecture, which is happening in about 3/4 of an hour. But thank you, Joyce. There's so many questions, so many wonderful things that will come out of this. It's really fantastic. And Peter as well. So just to recap while we unplug stuff here,